So audible, visible, I suppose. So let's discuss this paper. Okay, I hope the screen is visible, right? So Thursday session, we'll discuss some current affairs, biomedical R&D or technology, right? So we are doing biomaterials. I thought it would be a good time to discuss a specific application that is a stent. Okay, because you notice in GATE syllabus what we are learning is the vocabulary. Okay, and the vocabulary is actually required to look at uh, real world problems and eventually solve it. Okay, and this is a cardiovascular disorders is a major issue. So stenting is one of the important applications. Okay, biomedical applications, and the problem is you put a stent, there are complications. Okay, typically you put a stent because there is stenosis, there is blockage of this blood vessel in a local region. Okay, there is stent to remove the blockage, but there is restenosis. Okay, and one of the reasons is again blockage. This stenosis typically leads to rupture of the vessel wall, typically plaque rupture followed by clotting, and this many people this shows up as a heart attack, right? Heart attack symptoms. So the thrombosis, clotting is also a complication. Many of the patients where this stent is implanted, so they are at risk of clotting. So they typically give them some kind of anticoagulation treatment. This is something very complicated, tricky treatment in the sense that this is almost like those who know about that, they literally say this is like walking on a tightrope. Okay, so one side things lead to like clotting, right? Blood clots a lot, and the other side blood doesn't clot and then leads to bleeding. Okay, this is like walking on a tightrope. So controlling that is a important challenge. Okay, even today. So stenting involves these complications. Okay, and this paper discusses what these complications are. Okay? What these complications are, how this has been addressed with a historical perspective. Okay, and it also takes us to the research that is going on at present. Okay, so notice, and this is specifically important from a developing world perspective, because many of you would have heard about this. Does anyone know the name of the indigenously manufactured stent? India, indigenously manufactured stent. This is often mentioned as one of the important advancements and innovations in biomedical engineering as far as India is concerned. Does anyone know the name of that? You could quickly Google that. This is referred to as Kalam Raju stent. Okay, so Kalam Raju. This is a BMS stent, bare metal stent, and of course, even today there are companies in India that manufacture some of the advanced version of stents. This biopolymer drug eluting bioresorbable scaffolds. They are at least starting to manufacture that. Okay, there are companies that have started. Okay, so our task today is to understand this terminology And one important thing being that when this Kalam Raju, of course, Dr. Abdul Kalam was a part of that team, named after him. If you manufacture it indigenously, now you can bring down the costs and you can make this treatment more affordable, accessible, right? That was the point of it. But notice, bare metal stents are known to have a lot of complications, right? So we have to understand what these complications are, and bare metal stents typically need to be innovated further, okay, modified further. So we have to understand the complications and then accordingly do engineering modifications. Okay, so even if these doctors typically prefer drug eluting stents that are imported, very costly, which means again access and affordability is like drastically reduced. Okay, even if it is indigenously manufactured, often this is reasonably priced lower than what you import, but still making it as cheap as BMS is an important challenge that needs to be addressed. That is making some of the second generation, third generation, current generation stents as costly as a bare metal stent, okay, while also being as effective as some of the best stents, without a lot of complications. That's a very important challenge that needs to be addressed. A lot of research work is going on. The objective of today is to look at what these complications are, how those complications have been addressed, and so at least take you to the boundary of it. In principle, this is where you are. This is what different, what the industry is doing, and possibly what kind of a role you could play if you're interested in that. Okay, so the idea is to bring you all to the edge of that boundary, okay, in a 1 hour setting. I'll try to do as much justice to this as possible. Notice this is authored by mostly this is a team of doctors, mostly MD, PhD MDs. So but again, I have reasonable background to discuss this. Okay, so my PhD problem is coagulation. My postdoctoral problem is CRT, cardiac resynchronization therapy. Especially from an engineering perspective, I have created virtual hearts. So this is relatively easy for me. Okay, let's do that. There is a central picture here. Here is a central picture. So notice this is in fact from one of the leading journals in cardiology. Okay, Journal of American College of Cardiology. This is one of the best journals. It's written by a team of doctors. Okay, some of them PhDs, of course, but mostly doctors and doctor PhDs. And this is in 2018. So I gave this analogy of walking between two tight, walking on a tight rope. I think even doctors like the language of analogies. They are seem to be referring to some mythological creatures. Two dangers at either side, right? Scylla and Charybdis. Okay, you could Google this. I don't know what this is. Okay. So if you look at you put a stent. So there is a saying, all roads lead to where? Lead to Rome, is it? All roads lead to the saying in English. Some all roads lead to some place. Does anyone know that idiom or phrase or that saying? So all roads. Let me quickly Google here. All roads lead to Rome. So, typically this means that there are many paths to the destination of interest, or more importantly, in fact, the paths are different, okay, but the end is always the same, right? The rivers specifically take different paths. They always reach the ocean, right? So in that sense, any trajectory after you put in a stent, any trajectory leads to stent thrombosis. Okay, now the question is how fast? Okay, how fast? That is typically the question, and like in which way, which typical way is it going to stent thrombosis? So we have a couple of terminology here. We have impaired re-endothelialization. So I suppose the endothelium is marked by blue lining here. So we have a lumen. I suppose the stents are shown in dark gray lumen wall, and you have this fat deposition, atherosclerosis on one side of the lumen over here. What happens is after you put in a stent, there is endothelial growth. Almost, this is the circumference of the lumen. Lumen is this blood vessel cross section. Okay, so almost everywhere this endothelium has formed, except for where there is this atherosclerosis, right? So endothelium doesn't form there. This is the wall that separates blood from the tissue. There's a boundary between where blood flows and where blood doesn't flow. That boundary is breached. Okay, and the moment that boundary gets breached, and in fact, what happens is you have certain proteins in this side of the wall. Okay, and the moment those proteins come into contact with proteins in the blood plasma, it starts coagulation. This, in fact, this clotting here again schematically shown. This reminds me of the movie World War Z. How many of you have seen World War Z? Has anyone seen World War Z? World War Z movie. No one? Harish has seen. So there, in fact, Jerusalem. They'll be in a city, right? Jerusalem, and of course, it's a movie. This is somewhat, fictional. People around, people in Jerusalem. Yeah, it's a zombie movie. People in Jerusalem would have built a very tall wall. So entire world would have been infected by zombies, except for Jerusalem. There is this huge wall surrounding the city. And in a particular scene, there will be a breach of that wall. Okay. So zombies will be breaching, going past, crossing that wall. In fact, that, I have spent more than 10 years in studying coagulation. That scene is a very simplified depiction, schematic of what happens during coagulation. Okay. So the moment things from one side enter the other side, there is this unimaginable cascade of exploding chemical reactions, enzymatic chemical reactions, which are in a positive feedback loop, except for like, see, roughly notice you have like nanomoles of proteins, right? Nanomoles, 10 power 9 moles. In fact, yeah, that suffices to trigger a macroscopic clot, eventually leading to heart attack and the person dying. So nanomoles, right? So it's highly exponential. Okay, the chemical reaction just explodes, and it's like multi-step and complicated network. So if this and all that is keeping that coagulation from happening is this endothelial wall. one of the most important you know uh, important layers in the entire human body, endothelial layer. Okay, so if this endothelial layer doesn't form, of course, typically minor bruise here and there, normal life, there is a bruise and then leads to clotting. Okay, so there is thrombus formation because of impaired re-endothelialization. What happens in this? Typically, what happens is because see the circumstances there doesn't help endothelialization. Okay, that is one reason. Sometimes the strut that you put in can also irritate the wall, irritate the endothelium, eventually damage it, irritate it, rupture it. This is a typically a metal wall, let's say BMS, metal stent that is scratching on this pulsating blood vessels, right? Of course, sometimes it can also irritate it. Irritation leads to inflammation, local immune response. It so happens that this inflammation and coagulation, they are closely coupled. Increased coagulation leads to inflammation, increased inflammation leads to coagulation. So again, sooner or later there is thrombus formation, leads to stent thrombosis that way. Then you have neoatherosclerosis. So notice this picture, again, all of these are schematics. We'll also look at some imaging modalities that is available. Okay, but notice you put a stent, but there is new fat tissue growth, neoatherosclerosis. Okay, this is notice all this is new. If we can highlight that, there's this new layer of fat growth. It's pushing the stent and growing in this case. Okay, there is like a necrotic core, the dead tissue and all the things that you don't want in a healthy blood vessel. All of that is over there. Eventually, again, this thing can easily rupture. Okay, this also has a tendency to get calcified. So, which is why this thing hardens over time. It calcifies. It's not just fat, but this is like now you're seeing this salt formation in steel buckets, and many things, jugs and all that. You'll be seeing this layer of salt deposition, right? So this layer hardens. A hard layer in a pulsating blood vessel easily breaks, leads to clotting. There is neoatherosclerosis and then clotting. Then there are two other typical modes. That is, the stent that you put in just did not fit the geometry. The size mismatch. It may say, what is there with the, after all, this is a, there is a diameter, we'll manufacture the stent to that diameter. But notice this diameter in all the schematics, it's a circular cross section. And as you traverse longitudinally, okay, it's not a straight line. It's not a cylinder, right? Cylinder is an idealization. That is one issue. And in fact, often complications occur at vessel bifurcations. Here you're looking at a single vessel. This is, sooner or later going to proximally or distally going to bifurcate. If there is a stenosis there, putting a stent there is going to be very complicated. In this case, what they have shown us, the stent has slightly moved from where you put in. It has malposition. This is a mismatch, primarily a geometrical mismatch. Okay. Sometimes what happens is the stent tube that you put in fails. We already discussed fatigue and all that is an important criteria, right? If the material is not good, the stent simply, breaks apart. Or in fact, you designed it to be bioresorbable. There is a part that is still hanging in the lumen, and that fails. That failure typically damages the endothelium and leads to clotting. So there are at least 5 paths, typical paths. All of them lead to stent thrombosis. So notice and in fact the this there are a couple of features. In fact, I'll show it in a different I'll show it here. That is eventually they all lead to thrombus formation, but there are also slightly 1 or 2 variants of that, okay, in real life. So notice following a percutaneous coronary intervention. So you have there is a locally there is a blood vessel stenosis. Now there is like this adenoma plague, fat. The wall has thickened due to fat deposition. That is referred to as the adenoma plague. Okay, and the lumen is now too narrow for blood to flow. Okay, what they used to do is, the initial things, put a balloon angioplasty, put a balloon, blow it up so that the lumen gets bigger. Lumen is where blood can flow. Lumen gets bigger. Happen because of that. Either there is an acute vessel, as soon as you remove the balloon, soon after removing the balloon, the thing closes. There is again stenosis, restenosis, or eventually there is plaque rupture and thrombus formation. So after following balloon angioplasty, typically there is restenosis, or the plaque ruptures and there is thrombus formation. Idea is you just put it, inflate it temporarily. That doesn't work, which is where the idea of why don't we leave a structural support there came, right? So which is where they thought of a stent, a scaffold to hold things in place, not let restenosis, or also give some support to the plaque over there. Supposed to perform 2 functions. Don't let the plaque rupture. At the same time, don't let the adenoma, that atherosclerosis, close it. Don't let restenosis. So give us support, which is the origin of usage of stents. Okay. So now you put a balloon, you inflate it. After inflating it, you also leave a stent. This is all done through the through using a catheter through a blood vessel. So this is percutaneous coronary intervention. Okay, you don't make major incision surgery and all that. Just some holes. Typically, let's say coronary, right? Typically in the femoral. Okay, femoral artery around your groin. You insert a catheter, go do all this. Okay. So this is a PCA, percutaneous coronary intervention. So again, you put a stent. Notice initially they were putting bare metal stents. What typically happens is there is yearly stent thrombosis. That is, after putting the thing, there is stent thrombosis. Okay, because sometimes again the reasons we have already seen, or there is also late stent thrombosis. What happens there is, notice it doesn't go that way. There is instant restenosis, not instant as in like instantaneous. This is instant restenosis. So restenosis is happening. The stent that you put in gets worse over time. Okay, so the wall grows on top of the stent that you put in. Okay, And one of the common observation is a particular layer in the wall, this intima, that specifically enlarges. Okay, so that is referred to as intimal hyperplasia. In this case, this is Neointimal hyperplasia. That is intimal hyperplasia after putting a stent. So neointimal hyperplasia. So this is severe diffuse ISR. Of course, this is this intimal instant renosis is quite severe. This is diffuse. This is throughout the stent, not at all localized at any particular direction, right? And then, so the question is, hey, let's not just leave a structural support. Can we avoid intimal hyperplasia? That was one question. The question is, hey, can we also try to avoid early stent thrombosis? Can we? Of course, they are in a sort of anticoagulation treatment. Okay, so that is one way to deal with early stent thrombosis. So thrombosis kind of handled with coagulation treatment, anticoagulation treatment. Can you prevent this intimal hyperplasia, which is where this thing of drug eluting stents came up. The idea is, can you somehow stop that intimal layer thickening? Okay, your drug eluting is primarily targeted at that. Okay. Even then, even with today's thing, notice, of course, there is still early late stent thrombosis, even after reasonably improved and advanced coagulation treatment. This is dual antiplatelet therapy. Happens, or at least when you put a DES, at least what happens is sometimes there is focal ISR. That is, it's not now all over the circumference, somewhat regional, and then that eventually leads to delayed stent thrombosis. So again, eventually there is clotting, that is eventually there is heart attack. So all these spots are always leading to heart attack. Okay. So now if you go look at this history, this will be, I think, better. So of course, history based on US. These are mostly FDA approvals and things like that. So notice 1997, they did a first coronary balloon angioplasty. Okay. And the first bare metal stent is from 1986. Tried it, of course, FDA approval and improving somewhat happened in 1990s. We deployed, how do you prevent restenosis? So a couple of these studies happened over here. So you have balloon angioplasty starting with 1985s. Okay. You have bare metal stent. Again, this leads to, this is better than balloon angioplasty, but restenosis rates are still high. You have drug eluting stents. This is from the 2000s. Okay. See, notice our bare metal stent actually manufacturing happened somewhere in 1990s. Okay. During the time of Dr. Abdul Kalam, right? So this is during 1990s is when they did ingenious manufacturing of bare metal stent. Okay. And the first generation of drug eluting stents, this is somewhere from 2000s, early 2000s. Decreases instant restenosis compared to BMS, because you have, of course, you have put a drug that will do that, but there is still late thrombosis and very late thrombosis, late stent thrombosis, very late stent thrombosis. Now the question is, can you again improve the DES so that there is so that it reduces both late and very late stent thrombosis while retaining some of the improvements that I have still done, right? So, and yeah, this is where we thought, perhaps metals is not the way to go. Why don't we use polymers, biopolymer, DES, and then why don't we put bio? This is why don't we make it bioresorbable? Perhaps it stays there for a longer time. There is late thrombosis. If it gets eventually resorbed, the stent is not there, but it has performed its function. That is, remove the stenosis and prevent the stenosis sufficiently long, right? So that is a question that we are currently asking now. And yeah, so the thing that we have already seen, right? Position, the central illustration that already discussed that. Now, let's look into details of this. 1G and 2G DES. Okay, these are from large scale RCTs, randomized control trials. Okay, so they have a stent name and manufacturer. For example, you have J&J, Boston Scientific, Medtronic. Okay, few manufacturers and the corresponding stents, Cipher. When did FDA approve it? Okay, the approval year and the month is given. What is the drug that is being eluted? So you have sirolimus, paclitaxel, everolimus. So most of these are variants of sirolimus. Can anyone quickly Google what is sirolimus? In fact, they have this description right over here. Drug action of mechanism binds to and forms complex with FKBP12, which in turn inhibits mTOR, blocks progression of G1 to S in the cell cycle. So mTOR pathway is one way this intimal hyperplasia happens. Abnormal cell growth at the intimal layer is referred to as a mTOR pathway. So this inhibits it, this stops that sirolimus. Okay. So many of these drugs are going to be variants of that. Then, okay, let's finish this. What kind of a polymer do they use? They use PBMA. They use PEVA. I suppose this is polybutyl methacrylate. PEVA, that's also should be given over here. Poly-N-butyl methacrylate, and then they use polyethylene covinyl acetate. Okay. Density of the drug is given. And see, some of these details are important from a drug delivery perspective. Yeah, this is in general, okay, this is immunosuppressive, but here, this if you Google mTOR pathway, it will, this mTOR pathway and intimal hyperplasia, that is that cell signaling happening, that will be given. Okay. So notice, and kinetic of drug elution, like, hey, okay, you put a drug, like how long should the drug be like released? It should release 80% within 30 days for a month. Okay. And the remainder 20% released by 90 days. What is a metal platform? So this is a drug coated by a polymer that is in a metal platform. This is stainless steel, and they have also given the strut thickness 40 micrometers. Okay. So what is SIBS? Just out of curiosity, polystyrene, D-isobutylene, B-styrene. Polystyrene. Okay. Again, notice paclitaxel blocks cell migration, cell proliferation. It does via cell cycle arrest in GO, G1, G2M. Okay. The pathway is different. That's a mTOR pathway. This is a cell proliferation using a different pathway. Then everolimus, semi-synthetic derivative of sirolimus, it's a variant of that. Again, zetorolimus, again a variant of sirolimus. Okay, and then so this is actually a summary of many clinical trials. How do you know what is better, right? Which generation is better compared to one? So you have pooled chars. I suppose it's not heart rate. This is hazards ratio and confidence interval. That is, so given the statistically, it's likely to lie in the range that is shown. Okay, hazards ratio is supposed to be in this range shown. By network meta-analysis of definite stent thrombosis, definite probable stent thrombosis, very late stent thrombosis, probable very late stent thrombosis. So you have cobalt chromium EES. So I suppose everolimus eluting stent versus bare metal stent. Okay, so if this hazards ratio, if this is 1, see, notice there is something called odds ratio and there is something called hazards ratio. So now we are talking about things in terms of time, right? Eventually thrombosis, but how fast, right? How imminent is the danger? So they are using this hazards ratio. The hazards ratio is 1. Both the stents perform equally. The hazards ratio is less than 1. Stent 1 is better. Greater than 1, stent 2 is better. Okay. Notice in all these things, compared to bare metal, okay, you have ES. Taxel. Okay, so you have ES. Okay, you have this left side performing better. Okay, and then in fact there is very rarely the bare metal stent is performing better. And of course there is also a distinction between, is it stent thrombosis or very late stent thrombosis? They are further in fact trying to differentiate definite or probable stent thrombosis. You have definite or probable very late stent thrombosis. So the endpoints are very different. Okay, with regards to the hazard, the danger event is defined differently. Here there is a stent thrombosis. This happens very late. Okay, and 1 second. So some of you might also be wondering, what is this very late and what is this imminent? Okay, so within 6 months you have stent thrombosis. After 12 months you have very late stent thrombosis. So the time scale is also roughly given. So even within 6 months, you have procedure and peri-procedural PCA. Okay, you have procedure and then post-operation window, then window within 6 months, and then window after 6 months. Very late is after 12 months. Within 6 months is yearly stent thrombosis. Okay, so you also know that timeline. And at least bare metal typically it's not there. Okay, at least this this because this PES seems to be performing. PES seems to be problematic. BMS performs only better in that scenario. Okay, this and SES, but you have of course stents available, right? So mostly this drug eluting is performing better. And okay, that the table is metal drug eluting polymers. You also have bioresorbable or biopolymer based DES, biodegradable polymer DES. Here again the drug notice, you have the stent name and manufacturers, Biosensors, Terumo, Cell. Okay, if any of you are wondering, there is something called Drill Life Sciences in India. Okay, they are at least making polymer, biopolymer, biodegradable stents. Okay. They are manufacturing currently. In fact, they are also manufacturing hot walls, synthetic hot walls. It's not here in this table, but they do. There are at least one manufacturer in India. So here it is. Biolimus, Sirolimus, Everolimus. Again, I suppose most are variants. Okay. Yeah, notice this is semi-synthetic Sirolimus, crystalline form of Sirolimus. So this is mostly Sirolimus variants. Okay. Here, EPC, they have a mild change, endothelial progenitor capture. So they have a couple of antibodies. Okay, they have two drugs here, sirolimus plus one more thing. Certain antibodies are immobilized. Okay. Again, some immune function is altered. Okay, in a favorable way, in very very simple thing. And then has the FDA approved it? No, except for one of them, Synergy Boston Scientific. That's the only thing that has FDA approval. What polymer type is used? I suppose polylactic acid. Yeah, polylactic acid, and then variants of that: polylactic acid, polylactic capro. Okay, couple of variants of lactic acid. Okay, PLA, PLLA, PLGA, mostly that. And that same table continues, the polymer BPDES, right? One important detail is bioresorption kinetics. So what kind of coating do you have? Okay, that at the circumference or abluminal, polymer thickness, resorption kinetics. How long does it take for the polymer to get resorbed? Mostly a span of 6 months. Okay, 6 to 9 months. So that is the time scale we are looking at mostly. Concentration few micrograms per mm. Kinetics of drug elution roughly in a month 45%. Okay, about 50% in a month, and then by in 6 months most of the cases 80-90%. Metal, stainless steel, cobalt, chromium, and things like that. This is platinum chromium. Also have mentioned strut thickness. Okay. Yeah. See, another important detail. One is to talk about possible mechanisms, eventual thrombosis, right? Using a schematic like this where things are fairly clear. But what we typically, if at all we get to see it, is through an imaging modality that looks like this, right? In fact, I have reasonable experience, if not training, looking at the angiograms. So I'll try to discuss that more compared to the OCTs below. These are, I suppose, optical coherence tomograms. So these are in the top you have radiographic images. Okay. And so you inject a contrast agent inside the coronary arteries, and then radiographically you get a image or a video. Okay, in this case an image is shown. This is the, I suppose, CX, is it? This is right coronary. This is now there are three major coronary arteries. You are looking at one of them that goes supplies to the right hand side of the heart. Okay, and so they have put a stent here as indicated by the arrow. Okay, and figure 1 is this is soon after implantation. So this is uncomplicated PCA, no complication during the intervention. Happens after some time. So this is late thrombosis after a couple of months, I suppose. See, notice you have after 12 months of DAPT. Patient completed 12 months of DAPT, and then 1 month later, so roughly in the 13th month, the patient presented with inferior STEMI. Okay, so heart attack, inferior STEMI, and I suppose the patient was taken initially not taken to a PCE capable center, so they are given a thrombolytic agent, thrombolysis. Soon they were transferred to a PCA capable center. See, one of the things is PCA capable center will need at least two things. They need this angiography mission. They need a interventional cardiologist on call. Okay, if those two are not there, you cannot do a PCA. Okay, and so notice what has happened here. This is indicated by this area. There seems to be, notice. I don't know how well this shows up the image that you are looking at, but there is a sort of a mild whitish area. This lumen is supposed to be dark. The contrast agent is supposed to be in the entire lumen, but here there is slightly bright region indicating something else inside the lumen. Okay, in roughly stenosis, a different view is given where you can see that more clearly. Hey, it's not just a noise, but this is rather a clear, at least a stenosis in the lumen. Okay, blood is still flowing. Notice, so you inject the contrast agent somewhere in the proximal region here. It is still flowing, right through all the bifurcations. So there is no blockage, complete blockage here, but rather there is a sort of a protrusion there. There is a sort of a restenosis there, right? This is what you can see, and this is better seen in this OCT image, optical computer tomogram. So this is again cross section of a lumen. This is soon after placing the stent. Okay, so notice the stent cross section is visible here. My mouse pointer is visible. Yeah, notice the stent cross section is kind of visible at many places. What is this thing? This artifact here? Can anyone recognize that? There is something very dark, radial dark line. This is the shadow, the catheter that you put in. Notice this is a transverse view of the lumen. Okay, the top. You can see the straight, straight line. That is a catheter, and the blood vessel is, surrounding that. So this is a catheter. Is very straight. Okay. So in the cross-sectional images, the other images, this is showing up as a shadow. So that is essentially a catheter that you are seeing. And again, they have shown 4 cross-sections. Notice there appears to be a sort of a protrusion here. Okay. So there is a proximal, yellow is proximal, and then red is distal. Yeah, at least here we can see a clear restenosis going on. Okay. Suppose there was a stent. This supposes a stent cross section, but there is stenosis. As you go further, at least, yeah, there is in section B, you have a clear stenosis. Where is that section? Yeah, this is over here. Okay. Probably that is what is pointed in the arrow over here. So notice this is, and this is done in vivo. This is the patient after 13 months, right? He has taken to us. So this is in vivo, and this is roughly what you get to observe. Okay. Ex vivo, of course, you can take the sample. You can look at what kind of tissues it is there. That is how they discovered there is this fat deposition and plaque rupture a couple of decades back. But today, this one is to look at the schematic to see what is going on. Another one is to look at through an imaging modality. This is the only realistic view that you have. Okay. So this is, in a sense, direct sense or extended sense. Okay. And this is science. Beyond senses, going beyond perception. Okay. Okay. Right now, this is a cartoon, but there is an important distinction there. That is, our senses. If you specifically look at eyes, there are only certain wavelengths and certain things you could see. You cannot, certainly you don't have Superman eyes to look at inside the body. Your direct senses have certain limitations. We can easily go past that and easily extend the range of our direct senses, in this case our eyes, inside the human bodies. Okay. Not just that, you could go one level beyond the indirect senses. For example, the knowledge that we obtain is at least represented in the schematic. Okay, this is going beyond indirect senses. In fact, this is one of the hallmarks of science, or scientific pursuit of knowledge. Okay. Anyways, let's get back to that. That, and the story doesn't end there. And BVS also, they have studied what happens typically. There is a resorption, complications, some of the natural history of what happens once you put a scaffold, something bioresorbable, what happens. This is also typically studied. Okay, but there is one major difference between metal stents and this bioresorbable polymer stents. Metals are quite strong, so they can be made very, very thin. If you are putting a biopolymer stent, it should be reasonably thick. In fact, that should be there in the data that we saw. Strut thickness, biopolymer strut thickness, this is roughly 120 micrometers. Okay, 100 micrometers, in the order of 100 micrometers. How thick was metal? It's also same thickness, is it? It's also same. In fact, so what is, in fact, one of the conclusions is, hey, if you make biopolymer stents thickness similar to that of metals, they are going to fail easily. They are degradable to start with. Fatigue and all that is really out of the question. So at least you need to make the thickness stronger. Okay, that is one of the comments made in the paper. Okay, this is where the biomechanics and things like that you study comes into picture. You test how strong is it, right? In fact, how do you quantify it? How do you characterize it? So these are all in the realm of biomechanics. And so here we are looking at the third complication, that is thrombosis. Okay. So this is a double-edged sword. Notice this is a tight rope in the center and you're walking on it. If you err on this side, you have bleeding. If you err on the left, you have clotting. and there is this very, very, very fine line that is still being like not very well drawn. Okay, here you can see a nice line. I am saying that knowledge wise, the line, that the subtle balance here is not very well known. Okay, so you have stent thrombosis. So again, one more thing, they have something called dual antiplatelet therapy. So aspirin is an anticoagulant. In fact, elsewhere, the question is, hey, once people reach an age of 50 or something like that, can we start prescribing low dose aspirin along with some, pressure medication and perhaps some, you know, uh, other things. Okay, that's a question that I. So aspirin, most of you might have heard that time. It's an anticoagulant. Here, this is in fact specifically targets, makes platelets less sticky. Coagulates, at least initially, because platelets stick to each other. Okay, aspirin makes it less sticky. They recognized, so that alone doesn't suffice. So they also stop platelets sticking to each other through a different pathway. So that is the dual antiplatelet therapy. Okay, so interestingly, blood can clot. So, few other coagulation mechanisms. Platelet is one. Also, blood, clotting factors in the blood. That is, at least DAPT doesn't does that. Okay, so notice you have different trials. So this is, if you are looking at stent thrombosis, continue this coagulation treatment for longer, right? Again, you have here, you have odds ratio, that is which is better, shorter or longer DAPT treatment. So longer is stent thrombosis. The odds are, in fact, the odds, if it is 1, there is no difference. If it is greater than 1, there is a chance of that event, higher odds of that event happening. So here on the right hand side, mostly higher chances of stent thrombosis. Okay, here of course, notice if you're looking at bleeding, what seems to be preferable is at least shorter DAPT. So in fact, this odds are against. So if you treat it for very, very long, okay, your chances of bleeding is very high. And then here, if you treat it for very, very short, the chances of thrombosis is very high. That is the way to read these two figures. So ideally, shorter time span of treatment, that is problematic. Longer time span of treatment, that is also problematic. And that also depends on the stent that you choose, right? So which stent, how do you monitor, how do you handle this? This itself is a major challenge. Of course, this is a schematic for how you control how you decide coagulation treatment. Okay, so doctors have at least a tree, a decision tree for that. Okay, and in fact, let me also point out one of the major problems here is at least what is in current use is a very, very rudimentary measure of blood's tendency to clot or bleed. Okay, and certainly this is not available in a point of care testing format. You'll give it, it will come after 2 days. By then the blood's tendency to clot has already changed. It is changing every day. Morning the tendency was something, right? When you are about to wake up from sleep, your tendency of your blood's tendency to clot is very different. In the afternoon, before and after a workout, before and after a meal, and in the evenings when you go to sleep. In fact, typically frequency of heart attacks are higher in the mornings, right? So point of care testing, can you do that? That's also an important question here. Not just in India, all over the world they are asking that. Okay, how do you manage bleeding? Okay, there is this thing. Okay, 8:30. Question, let me quickly, do any of you have questions? I likely will stay, at least I will stay till 8:45. If you have questions, quickly 5 minutes I will answer that, but I have many other questions for you. So the point is, there are still many companies acting on it, right? So you can, as a biomedical engineer, how can you contribute it? Notice this is anything to do with the strength of the matching the size and geometry fit, that is mostly biomechanics, right? And then with some bioengineering and with some biomaterials, you are looking at drug eluting stents. But typically this is also, if you have to synthesize new drugs, new variants, right, then you need to be, this is more of a biochemistry background. Okay, but how do you manufacture that drug? How do you coat it with the drug? How do you coat the stent with the drug? Right? These are questions that you can answer. In fact, how do you control the kinetics? Right? Again, you can answer that and address that as an engineer. Be it from an imaging perspective. In fact, this is from one patient, right? But even I told you PCA is not, PCA requires resources as well as expert. So without that, you cannot perform that. So typically the mode of treatment here is a delayed thrombolysis. Delayed because the person typically goes to a clinic nearby where the golden hour is wasted, right? So how do you make this imaging modalities bring down the cost of that, right? More affordable, accessible. Typically, in the West, the idea is you will go better and higher generations, better resolution, right? So the cost typically goes up. And even if you look at, there is also one more reason. Doctors know BMS, at least there are better alternatives to BMS. So if a patient comes to a doctor and tells him, sir, I cannot afford that drug eluting stent, so just put me that BMS. Doctor is likely to say, not in our hospital. Perhaps go try a different hospital, because the doctor knows, this is prone to complications. So he would rather prefer an imported stent, right? So there are many ethical complications, okay, as well as the drug eluting stent is there, but again, it boils down to, is it accessible, affordable? Okay, and yeah, I already told you a couple of companies that manufacture biopolymer stents, bioresorbable stents, including walls, right? So those are places to look for. And if you are, from either from a modeling perspective or from a testing perspective, it's just you have a stent, it will undergo all kinds of biomechanical testing, tension, fatigue, whatnot. Okay. So again, biomechanics knowledge is useful. And we are looking at the stent cross section. That is, we are looking at few rods. So what exactly is that origamic structure in the stent? Again, some creative engineer designed that. Okay. Most of the things that is there in the syllabus, words, bioactivity, biodegradability, these are important real life consequences, right? That is one important thing that I wanted to show you. One second. No questions? Did any of you find this useful? This discussion specifically? I mean, useful, sir, it doesn't help me get a job, fine. Interesting or useful, okay? I know the word useful is problematic. See, so stent major application, material perspective, biomaterial perspective, biomechanics perspective, testing, of course, typically they will also play the role of regulatory affairs, right? Imaging, testing the stent is one thing. Let me tell you, this point of care testing of coagulation, that itself is a major challenge. And now that, there are always comorbidities. This person has heart attack, that person having a, chance of stroke is higher, right? So do I protect the brain or do I protect the heart? You can get into some dilemmas like that. Okay. In fact, bleeding and thrombosis is a dilemma. Okay. Point of care testing devices, that's an important problem. Okay. Again, I know at least many labs are working, including some groups in India. Okay. They are working on that. And so interestingly, if you take a step back, why does stenosis happen? Why stenosis at the first place? Why does nature put this blood vessel all of a sudden part of locally or diffusely? Okay, there is, I mean, focally or diffusely there is stenosis. Why is that happening? At least guess. Can you any guesses? So why forget restenosis? My question is on: have any of you wondered why stenosis? And it's also very, very typical for stenosis to occur near bifurcation. So to stiffness of the wall because of build-up. Hey, in fact, this lipid hypothesis is losing its causal role. Okay, the AHA guidelines, current guidelines, fat is no more the culprit, no more the causal culprit. It's just like there is a collateral damage going on, but the causal culprits are different. Stiffness of the wall. I don't know what you mean by stiffness of the wall, but notice what is this intima? In fact, why intimal hyperplasia? That is an interesting question to ask. Okay, there is again, these problems. There is no clear answer, but I'll get you thinking in very interesting ways. So notice your heart is not the only pumping organ in your body, or it's not the only pumping muscle in your body. There are also smooth muscle cells. Every smooth muscle cells. So most of you know this theory question, right? Any vessel, this has one of the layers is this smooth muscle cell. In this case, the intimal layer. So pressure is too high, they will, they are they will try to correct the pressure, can contract and relax. It's a muscle. They can do it autonomously. That is without taking instructions, right? So which is why you shiver when you are in a cold place, or like there is pressure regulation happening by smooth muscle cells in one of the layers. And you cannot just regulate pressure in isolation. There is also flow regulation happening. What I mean by that is, often your different parts of your heart, because of various reasons, start demanding different amounts of oxygen. Already there is a left-right asymmetry. Left atrium, left ventricle, right ventricle. You know the difference. Left pumps to the entire body, right pumps to the only to the lungs, right? It's easier, right? But even within the left ventricle, different regions could have different metabolic demand, oxygen demand. So one of the roles of smooth muscle cells is by pressure regulation. They can also do flow regulation. They can increase and decrease flow to different regions. You could think of them as traffic policemen standing in the road and trying to control the traffic. But these are not standing in the road. They are standing, at the sides of the road. Okay. So, of course, the system gets abused due to various reasons. One of the important reasons being, issue with the wall. One of the hidden problems here is something called mitral regurgitation. Okay, and which can be, there can be latent mitral regurgitation. That is, normally you go check, there is no mitral regurgitation, or you check your condition of a heart using echocardiography. Hey, the heart is pumping properly. Only if you are careful, you notice there is actually mitral regurgitation. That is, it's pumping, but it's going in a different way. All right. Or you notice there is mitral regurgitation only if there is increase in heart rate. Normal heart rates, there is no leakage, but heart rate increases, person gets stressed, that is, person is performing exercise, at the time there is mitral regurgitation, right? So there can be a demand supply mismatch. Regions require metabolic demand. The heart thinks it is pumping, but it's not really reaching, and all of the smooth muscle cells say often gets overstressed and overworked, right? And eventually they maladapt. Okay, this is a typical reason. That is, smooth muscle cells overadapt. This is this is just like, if your friend goes to a gym and only his right arm is working, he does workouts with only right arm. His left arm is not getting worked out. You could see in like 2 months how his right arm look and left arm looks, right? Like that, if there is a variation in metabolic demand requirements, and often there are also chance variation snowballing. There is stenosis, okay, because locally it's trying to control pressure and flow. Over time it gets abused, and eventually all roads lead to thrombosis. So again, one of the questions is, see, notice in this entire paper, so this is all of course about restenosis, but why stenosis? Or what would bring down the hazards of stenosis, right? Again, if you ask, the question would go down, it will go to stress reduction, pranayama, and all of that. Okay, yoga, pranayama, stretching, stress reduction. So, in fact, the story is it works very well in, once the damage is done, even there it works. One cardiac rehabilitation, that works very well. The question is, in fact, it's likely and also known to work earlier also. It will slow down some of this trajectories. Forget restenosis. Stenosis, it will slow down. There is actually silent heart attack. Many people could be having heart attack, but without symptoms. Okay. There is silent ischemia. There is also silent heart attacks. So, so one of the simplest things is to actually, bring down the levels of stress. So why stenosis is an important question. Okay, that also needs to be addressed, and this is a problem that is very, very, very rich in, many fertile. This is a very fertile ground for innovations. Any direction you pick, you can easily innovate, and you can easily improve status quo, and you can make a change. Okay, so again, if you are interested, at least I wanted to get you familiar with the problem. If you are interested further, you have to probe, you have to get the skills, and then you have to look for companies that that will let you do this work, paying you, right? So that, or either in a company, or you have to join a lab or start a lab or start a company. So yeah, that is the objective of this discussion. So let's stop here. So that mitral regurgitation, look for coronary flow reserve. Okay, there are few things that I couldn't cover today. Look for coronary flow reserve, which will actually tell you like, hey, the heart blood vessels can actually change flow based on interest. Whenever there is a bifurcation, the amount of, in fact, even the number of RBCs going on the left and right, it's like, it can be controlled. Okay, so there are very interesting things, but let's stop here. It's over time. Find another topic for next week. Okay, let's stop here. Have a good one. Take care. I'll see you again tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow we'll have a theory quiz.